Welcome to the End of Innocence. I'm your host, John Young. Charlie Sheen compared the death of controversial conservative commentator Charlie Kirk to the 1963 assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Sheen says, quote, I think for this generation, that's their JFK moment. If that's where we're wound up, it cannot be where we stay. It's too surreal to process it, the unfairness of it. We can't keep having days like that moving forward, end quote.
I think for this generation, I think that's their JFK moment. I mean,
Yeah.
seriously. And I just, if that's where we've wound up, it cannot be where we stay. It's still, I don't want to say it's still not. It still doesn't feel. It's too surreal to process it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just the unfairness of it. Because that dude, he didn't demean people. He didn't ridicule people. He didn't belittle or embarrass or gotcha. He showed up as prepared as you could have been, as passionate as you could have been, and just asked people to just have an open debate. Just, okay, here's what I believe and here's why. And let's hear your side of it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That it turned into that is just it can't be. We can't keep having days like that moving forward.
Something has happened in the motorcade route. Something, I repeat, has happened in the motorcade route.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time.
The assassination of President John F. Kennedy in 1963 shattered more than a life. It splintered the soul of a nation. Americans stood still, gripped by grief, as voices crackled through radios and images flickered on television screens. In that shared moment of mourning, unity gave way to uncertainty, and the country emerged fractured by conflicting narratives. Nearly 60 years later, the sudden death of Charlie Kirk echoes that rupture. Though not a head of state, Kirk's influence as a Christian evangelist, youth advocate, and culture connector gave his loss a resonance far beyond the individual. His passing feels like a wound to the collective conscience, a rupture in the fabric of truth that threatens to widen the fault lines already dividing American society. When President Kennedy was assassinated, the nation's first response was raw, unfiltered grief. Strangers cried together in the streets. Political differences dissolved in the face of a shared loss. A man, a husband, a father had been taken. Charlie Kirk's death evokes a similar human ache. Even those who opposed his politics find themselves stunned, disturbed, and searching for words. Because violence in its purest form bypasses ideology, it strikes at our shared humanity and leaves a scar on the national soul. In the immediate aftermath of JFK's assassination, the quote lone gunman narrative swept the nation. Lee Harvey Oswald was cast as a villain, and the case seemed closed. But as time passed, inconsistencies emerged. Bizarre bullet trajectories, conflicting witness accounts, whispers of CIA entanglements. Now with Charlie Kirk's death, a similar pattern is unfolding. Already, an official story is taking shape. Who fired the shot? What was their motive? Who stands to gain? A ready-made narrative will be served, clean, convenient, and calculated, to shut down inquiry before it begins. The unity that briefly followed JFK's assassination quickly unraveled. Grief gave way to suspicion of the government, the media, and even one another. Conspiracy theories flourished, not because people were paranoid, but because they seemed something was missing from the official story. JFK's assassination marked a turning point in American consciousness. The idyllic vision of Camelot, a nation bound by unity, optimism, and trust, was shattered in an instant. In its place emerged a darker mood, cynicism, suspicion, and a growing unease with the institutions once held sacred. For many, that moment signaled the birth of modern distrust. It truly was the end of innocence, a fracture in faith that still echoes through the corridors of power and public discourse today. Charlie Kirk's death threatens to follow a similar path. Already political fault lines are hardening. To the right, he will be remembered as a martyr. To the left, his passing may be met with doubt or dismissal. And for those who thrive on division, his death will become a tool, a spark to inflame tensions and deepen the rift between Americans. The deaths of JFK and Charlie Kirk reveal that the real battleground isn't just in the streets, it's in the mind. Grief softens our defenses. In those vulnerable moments, the subconscious becomes porous, absorbing narratives without resistance. Headlines slip past scrutiny. Slogans repeated often enough harden into truths. It's in this fog of mourning that perception is shaped and sometimes manipulated. History may not repeat itself, but it often rhymes. The assassination of JFK marked a seismic shift in America's collective psyche, a rupture that ushered in an era of doubt and mistrust. Charlie Kirk's tragic death carries the potential to become another such inflection point. Whether it leads us toward clarity or deepens the fracture depends on what we choose next. To truly honor Kirk's legacy, we must resist the urge to weaponize his death. Let us reject hatred, refuse the lure of propaganda, and recommit ourselves to honest dialogue and courageous discernment. Because the real battle isn't left versus right, it's truth versus illusion. Former Fox News anchor Clayton Morris recently welcomed JFK assassination researcher and author Roger Stone onto his show Redacted to discuss the alleged connection between the killing of Charlie Kirk and the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Here is their important conversation.
Well, it seems we're getting more questions than answers into the assassination of Charlie Kirk. The FBI wants us to believe their official narrative. Tyler Robinson was the shooter. He's not cooperating with police, and within that short timeline, they managed to lock up the case. Nothing to see here. He's a lone gunman. He fired a .30-06 round into Charlie Kirk. Where's the exit wound? Why was Charlie Kirk receiving death threats? We now learn just a few days before he was assassinated. His right-hand man, Frank, who was there in the car holding his body as he passed away, admitted that Charlie was receiving death threats in the days ahead of time, and he told him to increase his security detail. We're also learning some interesting information about that security detail, the Schaefer Group. We wanted to bring in Roger Stone. He's the best-selling author of The Man Who Killed Kennedy, the case against LBJ. Roger knows all about how people can conspire to kill a man, and this is really an interesting template into looking at Charlie Kirk's life. Roger has had a lot of questions over the past few days after the passing of Charlie Kirk. Roger, good to have you back on the show.
Great to be with you. You know, having written this book on the Kennedy assassination, I've also just finished a book on the attempted assassination of President Ronald Reagan. I'll be out before the end of the year, I think by Christmas. Having studied very closely the assassinations of Senator Robert Kennedy and Dr. King, there's just a lot of recurring patterns here. Obviously, in the case of Kennedy, the lack of an exit wound has confounded historians and JFK researchers for decades. It's not possible for Sirhan to have shot Senator Robert Kennedy. He was always in front of Kennedy. But the autopsy by Thomas Noguchi, one of the most respected pathologists, then the LA medical examiner, said that RFK was shot at point-blank range from behind in the lower left skull. That would be with the barrel right up against his skin. And in the case of Ronald Reagan, John Hinckley Jr. is always in front of Reagan, crouching, meaning bullets came from the front and an upward trajectory yet. As I will prove in medical records, Reagan was hit from above and behind. And so it is with Charlie Kirk. I've tried to focus on this as a two-part question. What happened? And then to try to determine who was behind it. As you point out, the FBI has wrapped this up very quickly. They told us in 7 days. J. Edgar Hoover told us that Lee Harvey Oswald, a lone nut, a communist, that was his motive, killed JFK. Virtually no one believes that today. Once again, the FBI tells us a lone killer, a radicalized leftist shooting from the top of the building. But between the dissembling of his rifle, the changing of his clothes, there's a lot of questions there. And then I've really tried to consult with both doctors who are experts on bullet wounds, as well as sportsmen and marksmen. And virtually all of them question the lack of an exit wound, very much like in the JFK situation, would be very rare, given the facts that we've been presented. So, now you've got all kinds of other theories. You've heard the theory that the driver of Kennedy's limousine turned around and shot him with a Derringer. That's not true. But you'll certainly find it all over the internet. Now you hear word of trap doors and the possibility that he had an exploding microphone. I haven't even had time to look at those theories. But at this point, I think everything should be considered, and the people deserve the truth.
We learned over the past 24 hours that Charlie Kirk said that the Israelis provide the best security. And there's apparently a deleted portion of his interview with Bill Maher that has surfaced from April, where we learned that Charlie's security on the day of his assassination was an Israeli-owned or a Zionist-owned Schaefer security group, who apparently ended their contract with Turning Points USA back in 2022, but suddenly showed up for this event. I haven't been able to verify this yet. Have you heard any news about his security detail? And would you be looking at them in any way? I mean, we've heard from Frank, his right-hand man, that these guys were incredible. They grabbed him, threw him right in the truck. They threw him right in the SUV. They were incredible on that day.
Well, obvious questions. First of all, why was there no effort to seal off the crime scene? You see people grabbing hats. You see the entire crime scene being contaminated. No security professional would have allowed that. Why the rush to remove the camera behind him? Why did it have to be done virtually immediately after he was slain? I find both those things, again, extraordinarily suspicious, given this vaunted reputation of his security team. And then all of look at those messages on Discord that are allegedly between Tyler Robinson and his transgendered boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever. They sure read like they were AI generated to me. They're a little too perfect. They certainly don't reflect somebody who's in a hurry by any means. Perfect grammar, perfect punctuation, a little strange. So again, I'm wondering whether, as in the Kennedy situation, we're being handed this package with a nice wrapped up bow, radicalized leftists acting alone from the top of the building, leaves a rifle where it can obviously be found, somehow disassembles it, reassembles it. Very strange, very, very strange.
Yesterday on the show, my lovely wife and co-host broke down and kind of went through the timeline, which that has been one of the most troubling pieces of this, Roger, which is this weird, it happens on Wednesday, September 10th at 12:23. 33 hours later, the alleged shooter turns himself in. Hours later, the roommate is picked up. And then Friday, right at 8 a.m., the governor of Utah comes right out at 8 a.m. So that 8-hour timeline after the roommate is picked up at 11:30 p.m. to the 8 a.m. the next morning, suddenly the Utah governor is out there at the podium saying, "We got him, we're all good, the roommate was released, nothing to see here, we got our man and we're done." The timeline, that it really makes zero sense to us here at Redacted, but what do you make of the hours that had passed and the quickness? I mean, you're still investigating the Kennedy assassination from all of these decades later, but they're done in 8 hours after they get his roommate. We're done. We're good. Nothing to see here, Roger.
Yeah, no, it is interesting. Almost immediately after JFK was killed, Lyndon Johnson is now president. It's before he's been sworn in, but he never needed to be sworn in. That was just to twist the knife in Bobby Kennedy, because he automatically became president upon John F. Kennedy being declared dead. So that whole scene that staged in Air Force One was completely unnecessary. Or it was to pass the imprimatur of power to LBJ and put Jacqueline Kennedy's stamp on it by making her stand there. She's heavily sedated, still splattered with her husband's blood. But in the immediate aftermath of Kennedy being killed at Parkland Hospital, The new president is in the elevator with Malcolm Kilduff, who's the spokesman for the president, the deputy press secretary. And Kilduff says to Johnson, "Who would do such a horrible thing, Mr. President? Who would kill our president?" And Johnson says, it was a Russian, son." He says, "A Russian? What kind of Russian?" "A Russian communist, son." Now, this is before the FBI has announced that Lee Harvey Oswald has been apprehended. So I think I've seen this movie before.
Right. We're getting this information. We were also getting news reports before we had official confirmation from overseas. We've seen this before. We saw this in the case, I think, of the Kennedy assassination. We've seen this in other cases as well on 9/11. Reports pouring in from overseas before the United States even had a chance to respond. I guess one of the other big pieces of this, I want to kind of circle back on this exit wound piece. You know, so many online sort of keyboard cowboys are trying to, point out that he was shot from the side, that this exit, what you see in his neck, of course, is the exit wound, that he was shot in the chest. It traveled up, hit his spinal column, and exited through his neck. That's a piece of the fragment from the exit wound. Your focus has been on this exit wound question. So what do you make of the videotapes of him being shot and speaking to the different experts that you've been speaking to?
They all point out that in their belief, there should have been a more prominent exit wound and some blood splatter from that exit wound. Virtually every doctor I've talked to who specializes in gun wounds, in gunshots, have said the same thing. Now, some have argued that the ammunition, the round, may have not been what we think it is, but almost all of them have said we need not just an autopsy, but we need a what they call a CT, a comptology study that basically does a computer image of the body from every angle, and that would be extraordinarily telling. Now, they're rarely done on people who have actually been killed. They're usually done on people who are still alive and still that they're trying to save. But in this case, every doctor I've talked to thought that would be necessary to try to determine the actual cause of death and whether he was killed by a bullet and whether that bullet had a specific upward or downward trajectory.
What about the medical examiner's report, Roger? Where are we at with that? And, we saw in the case of Matthew Crooks after Butler, Pennsylvania, his body was cremated almost, pretty quickly. His apartment was wiped clean. Do you think we're in the same mode of a cover-up here, or do you think we're actually going to see a medical examiner's report and full details and transparency?
Well, I think this is the great beauty of the internet. I mean, they were able to keep a very focused and controlled narrative regarding John F. Kennedy's murder, for example. We still have so many unanswered questions about Butler, Pennsylvania, yet we've moved on in a certain sense. Very few people still asking those questions. I think this remains to be seen. The government has their narrative, but let's take an example. The Wall Street Journal breathlessly reported that one of the casing shells had some transgendered slogan or theme on it. Yet the government's claim is that there was just one Antifa-oriented etching on one of the shells. I don't know to this day which one of those is correct. I think the Wall Street Journal is wrong, but then that would determine or show that the narrative that they want us to choose is that transgendered activism, radicalism is responsible as the motive for the killing of Charlie Kirk.
Do you think Tyler Robinson pulled the trigger? Do you think he's the one responsible solely?
I don't, but that's just a personal opinion, and it's a preliminary one. Again, I don't. Charlie Kirk was a very good friend of mine. I didn't know him until he reached out to me after 29 heavily armed FBI agents stormed my home at 6 o'clock in the morning to arrest me for the non-existent crime of lying to Congress about Russian collusion that we now know never actually happened. How can you actually do that? And he befriended me, became both a public and a private advocate for clemency in my case, an advocate for my unconditional pardon. I love the man. I spoke at most of his large conferences. He was very, very good to me. So this is, I don't want to dance on his grave. I'm not looking to push myself into the narrative. But having written 2 books now on presidential assassinations and worked with Anna Paulina Luna, Congresswoman from Florida, who's doing an extraordinary job, still trying to wrench information out of the national security apparatus on the Kennedy assassination. She still doesn't have everything she's asked for, everything the president has ordered released. It's a subject that I know quite a bit about. And frankly, I'm not going to stop my inquiries until I've satisfied myself that either the government's version of events is true or it isn't true.
Well, I guess I'll leave you with this, Roger, which is a question I asked you many months ago when we had you on to talk about JFK specifically. But who do you think is responsible for the death of Charlie Kirk?
Too early for me to say. It could very well be a radicalized leftist. That's possible. Maybe their theory is right. Look, I do have a very high regard for Kash Patel. I know him well, and I think he's a person of integrity. It'd be very hard for me to figure out why he would say something that wasn't true. At the same time, Charlie Kirk was becoming increasingly important on the international stage. I know for a fact that our mutual friend Tucker Carlson and others have said about the pressures on Charlie regarding Middle Eastern issues was very, very true. Look, there was a lot of disagreement within our movement about what to do regarding the Iranians' development of a nuclear weapons capability. And right. I think the president, in the end, kind of took the middle course, which was the right thing to do, a surgical strike. No boots on the ground, no long-term commitment. Not a single American service person loses their life. I'm fairly convinced that we did do serious damage to their weapons development program. I think that turned out to be exactly the right decision. But you'll remember there was huge debate within our movement about whether the president should do this or not, and whether Charlie Kirk got himself on the wrong side of people within that debate. I think that remains to be seen. There were some indications based on my own conversations with him that there were people who were supporters of his who were unhappy with his questioning of whether that was the right thing to do.
And, I didn't know Charlie as well as you did, but I do know that he wasn't the type of person given to hyperbole, just to fluff himself up and make him seem. He was telling people in private that there were death threats, as he was telling Frank that there were significant death threats against his life. I hope that the FBI is forthcoming with that information. Who specifically was threatening his life? And were these just keyboard cowboys, or was there a legitimate reason that he needed to beef up his security in the days before the assassination? So I hope we get these answers. Roger, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I guess this. We need to know the full and complete truth. I'm still not satisfied with what we know about Butler. It's amazing to me that the trial of the man who tried to kill Donald Trump in the West Palm Beach golf course is going on, even as we speak, is getting virtually no media attention whatsoever. Virtually none. Right. Most people don't even know what's happening. And there are even more questions about him and that incident than there are about Butler in many ways. So I think we need to continue to seek the truth. That's why programs like this are so vitally important. We're asking questions here. We're not making final assertions. We're asking important questions. But at the end of the day, we need those answers.
Well, I encourage you all to read the book. It's a great book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ. It's incredibly eye-opening and answers a lot of questions. Roger Stone, great to have you here on the show as always, and I hope, like you, that we get these answers sooner rather than later. I hope we don't have to wait 75 years for them. Thanks, Roger.
Thank you. Great to be with you.